for the record, the Biden Putin summit that is coming up at this obviously at Stonehenge or something, wherever they're having it, is going to be followed up with a solo press conference from President Joe Biden, and he will be speaking on what they spoke about and what he's comfortable with them speaking about and all those issues. And like a normal president that doesn't want to stand up there like he's on a leash, because that was one of the weird things about the Trump Putin, like codependent like presser that they had afterwards, where like it felt like okay, well, I want to be there when I want to watch you say what you're supposed to say. You're going to say what you and of course Putin, of course, praised Donald Trump as very talented this week and a big personality. And he said that Biden is less apt to make impulsive decisions, and which is true. Compared to Donald Trump, everyone has better impulse control. There are, there are people in prison for arson that have better impulse control now than Donald Trump. So over the course of, because they're meeting in Falmouth, England, which sounds like foul-mouthed a little bit, like the way it's written, which, considering Biden's language choices in the past, could work. Not that I'm throwing stones. I clearly live in a glass house that's shaped like a big F word. But Boris Johnson and his wife, Carrie, met with President Joe Biden and his wife, Dr. Jill Biden. She wore a jacket that said love on the back. This, of course, caused consternation, fear, and panic across the right-wing stratosphere, because we don't need to be loved. We need to be feared, because that's, I guess, our only option. And that whole, and let's be honest, that Jesus dude was a complete sucker. That would never work now. That's, by the way, that's a near quote from right-wingers surrounding Donald Trump right now about, that the idea of turn the other cheek. Don Jr. himself said that to a Christian pastor on a show he was on this week, pitching, his show, saying, the turn the other cheek, that wouldn't work anymore. Just basically the New Testament, garbage, throw it out. It's not practical. As if it ever was. The madness is striking. That said, they gathered in, the leaders elbow bumped when they gathered for they're still doing slight COVID things. They're wearing masks inside, largely because that's the protocol still in England, and also, for the record, we do not have definitive science, beg your pardon, on the efficacy of the vaccine and the and herd immunity and your own natural immunity against all of the variants. And these are world leaders from a multitude of countries that have a multitude of other countries that come and go, even in their own countries, even with those protocols. So there's a chance that the Delta virus version, the Delta variant, gets in.
It's a more intense mixture than your standard daycare gathering.
Yes, it is. And so the extra precautions are similar in many ways to the sweeping of the environment by the elite security forces of each of these countries for the safety of their world leaders. Because if something were to happen to these world leaders, were they to get sick or injured or harmed in any way, it affects not only the fact that, oh, darn, we got to get a new leader, but it also dips the markets, destroys the outlook for, our recovery from the pandemic. Like it can savage the economic recovery of any of these countries and damage them in a myriad of ways, depending culturally on how they would react to this kind of thing, putting them behind all the other countries, America, no less than anyone else in that regard. So if you're a thinking person, you would go, there are elements of unknowns. We need to tamp down on those unknowns as much as possible in this circumstance until we can get ahead of this thing. Yes, all the world leaders have been vaccinated. Do those vaccines protect you? Absolutely. With the variants that we know of, We don't know. We guess so. It seems so, but there's no definitive science on it because time will tell. Do they protect against any of the new variants that are happening? Do you need a booster shot to deal with these? These are still options as we roll this out. This is not by any means over. The red states have currently case rates in red states as far as deaths and illness are going up 3.4% in most of the red states, that especially the ones that are
just because they're treating it like it's over without doing any of the vaccinating,
and because they have the majority of the anti-vaxxers in their states, whereas the blue states are seeing a drop of about 10%. And it's continuing. California, a state with 40 million people in it, has dropped 10%, is below 1,000, I want to say 500 in its death rate for the first time since the spike last year.
March.
Yeah, and so they're getting a handle on it. And by the way, for the record, those large numbers are not happening in the blue hubs of these cities. They're not happening in San Francisco. They're not happening in Los Angeles. They're happening a little bit in places like San Diego and a little bit in Sacramento, but they're largely the Stockton kind of areas, the places that statistically would have used to voted for Reagan, let's say, voted for Trump this time, and now have become hardline. They're the people arguing about separating, splitting California in half, right? To make a brand new red state. Which isn't going to happen, for the record, but good luck with that. Please keep clamoring about it. I'm sure Caitlyn Jenner will make it part of her platform as she goes forward with her campaign that is completely fueled by Trumpers. So, and by the way, as a way of kind of driving up, by putting a trans person at the front of the ticket, giving them some cover for all the anti-trans stuff they're doing across the rest of the country. It's pretty transparent. And the problem that they have is that,
I see what you did there.
Yeah, there's no way that Republicans turn out to vote for her, and they allow it to just sit there. It's a sacrificial lamb kind of attitude. So, anyways, over the course of this, Boris Johnson has said, that there is intense cooperation between the world's democratic and technologically advanced nations. That America's leadership is clearly recovering, that that across the board, all the world leaders, I think Macron said today, that it's great to have America back at the table, speaking like an ally. Macron said Biden has shown that leadership is partnership, which is going to drive the right wing crazy. Yeah. And it's exactly my point, by the way, about what makes America crucial in these circumstances is that somebody's got to be, it's why we have a president, a presiding officer over our government. It's why in all gatherings, someone is usually appointed an arbiter or is the point person for the gathering of all the countries. And the United States has traditionally played that role, especially when dealing with the G7. And the brooming, and especially in the brooming of Russia from it, is the greatest example of moving from the G8 to the G7 as almost a direct action against some of the other member nations, but specifically at movement of the United States. That's the sign of the United States, while working in partnership, taking a leadership position in the G7 and trying to direct the world's democracies, the world's high level technology countries to use their best efforts to kind of come together on whatever shared goals they might have, while at the same time pursuing their own national interests within means. It's when we looked at the Paris Accord and and all the panic about how it's really just an attack on the United States, and it's trying to undermine us, and we sell ourselves out to the European nations and yada yada. And when you really look at it, all the language in any of these things says, as long as it can be done without economic harm to the people of each country, as long as you can do it without, detrimentally affecting the economic outlook for your country, as long as it doesn't do more damage to your country, because some countries, it's like, we want to set our standard at 2.5% or whatever. Well, if your country's already below that, that doesn't mean you pollute more. That's the target date. And all these things are sensible diplomacy where you talk about it in normal terms like adults, going, where all treaties, especially when they come to the environment, economic issues and stuff, end with a kind of do your best clause. And none of these have, these are not on like the Iran deal, where there are hardline lines, and if you cross this line, the deal's off. And they didn't cross that line. Trump just killed it anyways, which makes it hard to make those kind of deals in the future, because how do you set markers for another country and go, look, we'll operate fairly with you as long as you don't cross these lines. You don't cross those lines, and we still go against the treaty. What good is a treaty from a country like that? Well, we recognize that the treaties are between countries, but sometimes they're controlled by men like Donald Trump that will scuttle anything good. And that's, going forward, that's the part we're going to have to patch up. That's what takes time. That if you're going to enter into a deal, and that's why it will be partnerships with other countries. Like, you may not trust us because we just elected a guy like Trump who scuttled it, but the rest of the countries played nice, and we still kind of furthered it. The Iran deal stayed relatively structured or whatever. Right now, the tough part is that Venezuela and Iran are now partnering for munitions and all kinds of other stuff, fuel, and they're going around this because Trump broke the deal. And that leaves a really awkward partnership, which creates a potentially dangerous adversarial situation between us and Venezuela as a satellite response country from Iran. If Iran starts funneling money and arms from North Korea into Venezuela, then we have then it's basically a way for them to sort of pirate things up towards our southern border, and creates a geopolitical problem for us that wasn't there until the Iran deal was broken by Donald Trump.
Right.
That was effectively created by the slapdash approach that he has had. But in the meantime, there is a bunch of sort of recovery. They're spackling over the holes, and they are doing their best to do a fresh coat of paint on these things, and while checking for structural damage. And that's what the G7 is effectively having. Biden will also be meeting with Angela Merkel later this year. She is leaving office. She's done. But they're going to
term limits there.
I don't know if it's if she's stepping down. I'd have to look that up. But yeah, she will be leaving office. But she's coming to Washington. They're going to have this meeting. And there's still the Nord Stream pipeline stuff with Russia. That's been the big hang up with Germany. Germany has seen a rise in far-right extremism happening largely because of Russia, mucking about in their social media, mucking about in their groups, creating basically these beer push kind of groups within Russia. I mean, Putin famously murdered one of its dissidents in a park in Berlin, and it managed to get away with it in that regard, on a level that is striking. Didn't happen in Paris, didn't happen in all these countries, but Germany interacted, like literally tiptoeing around because of the energy source that they were going to need. Now, had Ukraine been more sound 3 years ago, and more available as a source for the rest of Europe, and to get maybe Germany would have made the leap, but effectively didn't. So anyways, we got to take a break. We'll be back right after this. It's the Hellsparks radio program, Mega Worldwide. While my favorite storyline is obviously the dead presidents surfing off the coast of Cornwall or wherever they were in what's got to be cold water as an environmental pushback against sewage in the oceans, which I think is a fantastic thing. I think they're the members of the G7 who are all, by the way, I think they're all in the Paris Accord, especially now that we've rejoined it, are all working towards improving every aspect of their relations with environmentally amongst each other. You've got a huge number of protests is kind of normal at this gathering. And the odd part is, it seems to be that the perhaps everyone at the G7, I can't speak for obviously, the French or others, but the United States is increasingly aware that while there are absolutely legitimate protesters there who care deeply about the issues that they're pushing, it is now an ongoing strategy to manipulate protests or create them out of whole cloth at every turn against democracies around the world by Russia. That is 100% the purpose therein. That this is the key that they are, they're counting on as the cheapest way to undermine democracy and faith in democracies across the globe is the idea that, and not for us, because I think a lot of us can differentiate the value of protesters and the disincentive of looting and rioting in that grouping, and go separate the message from the messenger sometimes, and understand that there's valuable social change or environmental change that needs to happen without panicking too much. But what this is really about is the people inside those countries, inside Russia, so that looking outward, our democracy always looks like a mess. And that there's always a problem. There's always discontent. Like, you think you got it bad. Look how bad it is in Germany and France with the yellow jackets, and in the United States and all these, because we find out, and I had, no one is surprised, I think, on an ongoing level that that Putin himself, has made it a very important point to kind of constantly deride democracies in general as being kind of chaotic and a pain in the butt, and that Facebook was a willing partner in a lot of these circumstances. And there was, lately we've seen a story where there was a digital marketing group run by Turning Points USA, which is a pro-Trump kind of college-age youth group of conservatives. And these folks created Facebook ads for Green Party candidates in a lot of crucial areas in an attempt to diminish the Democratic vote and make Democrats war with each other by, basically lifting these candidates up. And there's obviously been a lot of talk about the kind of Russian Bernie bots posing as Bernie bros, not just lifting up the Bernie campaign and giving it the illusion of more supporters, but also causing unnecessary rifts between Bernie Sanders' genuine supporters and the Democratic establishment or other candidates' supporters. That basically setting people at war against each other instead of simply having a disagreement about policy and timing, which is largely how a lot of this plays out. There's a lot of overlap on the practicalities between, how Bernie Sanders sees Medicare for all happening and how Biden is presenting a single payer system initially. Biden basically saying, like, you need this right away. You can't just scuttle everything and try to start from scratch. You leave too many people in the dust and they will be harmed. And Sanders was aware of this and knew it would take minimum of 4 years to do this transition, and that you would need something like single payer to move people in that direction and build the structure over time and make sure that it's that is sound enough to take the weight and necessary hits that a system like that would take. And that's a policy difference. And you can argue, the basis of that policy and how it's possible. And because a democratic society is about negotiating the possible. And you can do that peacefully, even as fervently as you believe in either side. What the Russians were attempting to do, and what their surrogates, the NRA, Turning Points USA, the Trump campaign, were doing, was to try and drive that up as much as possible. And we find out that Facebook was aware that these were fake ads, was aware that a right-wing group was making them, and that they were for candidates they do not support. That they were, they were there. And this is not just posting videos. It's one thing to create a fake account and let people find it organically which was also one of the Russian tactics that happened, was that they would set up a fake BLM site or a fake, Muslims for Hillary site or those kind of things, and then they would basically fill it with content that was red meat for right wingers. So they go, look what these Hillary supporters believe, when it really wasn't what Hillary supporters believed. It was what they had made up out of whole cloth to create this illusion that this was a broad-based idea, that all Muslims that support Hillary Clinton are of this ilk and blah, blah, blah. And they did this across a bunch of fronts. Well, Turning Points USA specifically hired this group and promoting Green Party candidates during the 2018 U.S. midterm elections. So remember, seats were lost. And the argument was that some of even the progressive candidates didn't win in areas where they should have won, arguably because even though they would have probably run away with it in some degree, their leverage was taken down by the existence of a Green Party candidate who took the even further left group that might have glommed on the people who think AOC is too conservative, jump off, honestly. Jump off onto a Green Party candidate or another candidate because they want to go further. And they also go, elections don't matter, but I'm still going to vote anyways, which is a very strange mentality. This was an organization called America Progress Now, not American Progress Now, which is always one of those standout things where I'm like, is this run by a person? Facebook was aware of the true identity of the advertiser. The conservative marketing firm Rally Forge. The deceptive nature of the ads, documents seen by The Guardian show, but the company determined that they did not violate its policies. Rally Forge would go on to set up a pro-Trump domestic troll farm for Turning Point Action, a sister organization of Turning Points USA, in 2020, earning a permanent ban from Facebook. So I want to say they were in Nevada or in Arizona. There were no policies at Facebook against pretending to be a group that did not exist, an abuse vector that has been used by the governments of Honduras and Azerbaijan, said Sophie Jang, a former Facebook employee and a whistleblower who played a small role in the investigation of the Green Party ads. She added, the fact that Rally Forge later went on to conduct coordinated, inauthentic behavior with troll farms reminiscent of Russia should be taken as an indication that Facebook's leniency led to more risk-taking behavior. We have to take a break. They didn't originate the idea of a troll farm by any means, but they knew that it would benefit them. And they basically learned the key points from what Russia did in the 2016 election. This is who's guiding it. If when materially they're there, if not, they're just by example. The Republican Party is following Putin's example at every turn because they envy his long-lasting power in the country, and aren't afraid of how he got it. We'll be back right after this.